Hey everyone, welcome back. Mark chapter 12. We're talking about a really familiar passage, the Great Commandments. Jesus summarizing the law, love God with everything, love your neighbor as yourself. And this weekend we had a couple fill-ins, guys filling the pulpit. Nick down for Danny, Yon filling in for Dan. So some different voices, but Danny and Dan are both with us as well. So we got six of us here to kind of talk about Mark chapter 12. And Keith, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about Blaze Church, Long Island. Tell us a little bit about yesterday's service and the message.
Yeah, it was great. The text is rich in that the religious is coming asking for the most important thing. And I kind of started there with the church to say that when the religious are asking a question, Jesus knows who he's talking to. And it's not foreign for that scribe to want to know out of all 600 plus commands, which one is most important. So I felt like the challenge for me was this is familiar text. If you've been around church for a while, you've probably heard love God, love others. It's kind of framed up that way, but we pulled on it in four directions of love coming to us down, love going back to God up, loving ourselves biblically, and then loving others. Um, and I feel like out of all of those four directions of love, um, I most resonated with, and the room also seemed to resonate with the loving God in our totality. So we spent a lot of time, probably more than we should have. I was definitely long-winded, so I apologize to my church for that. But there was Hebrew words, there was Greek words. We were having a good time, but looking at those words, lev, nefesh, meod, and what does it mean to love God with your heart? What does it mean to love him with your whole self and to love him with your muchness? I felt was so connecting to the room. Our plan this week is to kind of walk through. Bible Project has videos on those word studies. And so now during the week as a church, we're going to walk through those videos together just to really understand, are we loving God with everything? So I feel like that was the main crux out of everything in yesterday's message was, are we giving him our whole love? And we ended with communion, which was a good response time to say, this is his display of him giving his whole self. And now we're going to leave here loving God with our whole hearts, souls, minds, and strength. But good.
That's awesome. I think it's interesting to hear like where you landed for the bulk of your message because I think in our conversations back and forth this week, others of us, including myself, kind of gave the lightest treatment to that part of the passage, just for a variety of different reasons. I think you have to make choices, right? Like if you dive into everything in that passage, you're going to be there for hours. So you kind of make some choices, and it's neat to hear the choice that the Spirit led you to make and the way that it served your church well. And I know just from talking with you during the week over at North Central, that was probably one of the lighter parts, unless you changed since we last talked, in terms of where you spent your time. Talk a little bit about where you did spend your time and why.
Yeah, it felt kind of weird right in the middle of it to not spend very much time on that. It was a little strange, like in my approach. But I spend a lot of time in the front, love from God, a lot of time in that little Shema, the beginning, and then a lot on the uh, self-love as yourself, and kind of breaking down what does that mean? What is I mean, even just for myself, studying, being like, I never really considered like what is a Jew hearing the law, what's their construct of self-love? Like, what is it like? It's pretty much, and then going into how we have a pretty well-framed perception of self-love, and that's a pretty well-established construct culturally. But so a lot of time on the front end around that love from God, and that's like again, I think I did the same thing everyone else did, but it's a pretty common, I framed it in like I have a Marine Corps background, so I framed it in like the idea of a ditty, which is like a little pithy saying that helps resonate a larger principle to love God and love others. So trying to build some tension around, well, if we just leave it at love God and love others, we don't understand the context of that, the stuff that happened before and after, which is the Shema piece, and then the love others as yourself piece. That's where I spent most of my time was trying to say, okay, well, why does this matter to the people who've heard it a lot? And even for the people who might just be new to Christianity, and that's what they kind of understand. Well, if you don't get the stuff that's not in that pithy little love God, like the stuff that comes before the love God or the stuff that comes after the love others, then we're kind of missing the point. So, but that's where I spent most of my time, kind of on that piece. So, yep.
Um, Nick, tell us a little bit about where I know you took we get to see each other's outlines during the week sometimes, and I got to look at yours and see the path that you were taking through the text. You framed it all in the terms of I think the word great, right? Great. Was it great?
Yeah,
Great. Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about that.
yeah. Just just first of all, it's a wonderful church there. Just to be there was tremendous, and I felt that that passage, it reveals kind of the character and nature of God in a really awesome way through those sort of outline points that I had put together. Um, and I think for me, the part that I really felt where I was connecting with the church was around the idea of the mission of God, that sort of the love your neighbor uh, language that's in that text, particularly because Dan and Damaris, they're doing such a great job connecting to their community. It's one of the churches in our network that I would say has their pulse on the community in a way that I think is very, very rare in terms of just using their space for things like ESL and BOCES and just incredible. So I wanted to kind of pick up on that. They're in the middle of a push to get their sanctuary, new sanctuary going. So for me, in connecting with that church and being around them and seeing what they're doing and even how they're trying to reach out to the Spanish community, they had an awesome group of individuals in their second service that were just, man, it was just such hunger for God. It was beautiful. And so, that's kind of where I landed and kind of, I think, probably put the greatest emphasis in the first service. Second service, we kind of took a different direction. So it was kind of fun. I felt like, we were supposed to kind of, it was one of those moments where, Dan and I were just kind of chatting before service, and he had looked over at me and said, "Hey, if you feel like God's putting something different into your heart for the second service," and I took that as a confirmation because I kind of sensed that there was a bit of a different direction, which is a bit of a risk in a situation where you're coming in to fill the pulpit. But Dan and I have a really good relationship, and so I'll let him kind of fill you in and hear his perspective. But I thought it was a really cool day and fantastic church.
Awesome. Yeah, Danny, love to hear, you had the opportunity to kind of sit back and just be a part of the service.
Yeah, it's always good to do that, to sit and listen. And like Nick said, the loving our neighbor is just something that we drive home all the time at a church. We're very community oriented. Our mission is to love and serve every community, every culture, and every culture. And so every corner and every culture. And so it resonated with the church very well. But I love also what he said, where he connected that all of that is good. But then towards the end of the sermon, he said, but we have to love God back. We have to reciprocate his love for us. And it was just, for me sitting there, it was just, yes, I know that God loves me, that God wants to do this. It's God's work in me. But when he nailed that home, I thought it was a bit of an eye opener for the church, like just a reminder, right? Because it's such a familiar passage, but a reminder for the church to, hey, our responsibility, our response to that goodness of God is to love him fully. And so I
Mm.
enjoyed that very much. And it was a beautiful time in our second service, as he mentioned. It was just a beautiful confirmation, a prophetic confirmation of what God has been saying to us. And we really had a wonderful time. But it was just an overall good Sunday with Pastor Nick. He really invested a lot of great time with us. And so we were grateful.
We, I think I ended up really feeling the need to um, spend the most of my time at the beginning of the message on the Shema and the idea of covenant and God's sovereign, loving, choosing choice of Israel and the way in which he sovereignly chooses us as his church. And just felt a lot of need in the room for people. I have a heart for people who are trying really hard to serve God and are getting really exhausted in the process because they don't quite understand gospel sequence in terms of um, how life change happens that's different than religion, right? And so I just felt so much almost relief in the room as I was able to just share like the depth of God's love. And I use this illustration of how when you go to like an expo event or a fair, there will be people demonstrating products. And I use the example of like a magic mop that cleans everything off the floor, right? They do this at the State Fair in New York. And I kind of unpacked the example, like said, let's say you're standing there and you need a mop, and the person shows, well, look what this mop can do, and they pour Pepsi on the floor and they pour eggs on the floor and it mops it up. And then they ask you, do you want to buy this mop? And you say, I do want the mop, but I don't need that mop. I need a mop that cleans up lemonade. I don't drink Pepsi. I drink lemonade, and that mop cleans Pepsi and eggs. And I said, at some point they're gonna look at you and go, do you know this is just a demonstration, right? Like this isn't everything this mop does. I'm just demonstrating for you what the mop can do. And then we went to Romans 5:8, where God demonstrates his love for us, and that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. And I said, if the cross is just a demonstration of his love, like, and as I'm sharing it, I can literally see people just they're just closing their eyes and going, oh, it's this weight of like religious pressure to perform and to do. And that's why I felt like I needed to spend so much time there before I got to, yeah, there's a response, 100%. And I called for it as strong as I could, but only after they heard God like delights in you. The Father loves you. Look at the demonstration of his love at the cross for you. And I did hear more feedback than normal from longtime church people who just um, need to really submerge their hearts in that truth every day. And I thought I need to grow so much in living like that's true. And then when we got to the whole love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, I thought of this quote that I'd read years ago, and I kind of tweaked it a little bit to say, the sequence. And I know some commentators say don't break it apart. It's one big idea, and I think that's probably also true. But I thought, these words are worth looking closer at. And I said, why does Jesus start with the heart? And I think he starts with the heart because everything starts with the heart, right? So this quote, I tweaked it a little bit. So what it says now is what your heart loves most, your soul will find desirable, your mind will find reasonable, and your strength will find doable. Some of those words were different before, but I just wanted to use the four words from the text, right? What your heart loves most, your soul will find desirable, your mind will find reasonable, and your strength will find doable. And taking a little time in the room to unpack the sequence in which we behave, why we behave, how we behave, and stuff. I felt like it was a helpful gospel reminder. And then all the stuff on the challenge to love neighbors and the specificity of the Leviticus 19 passage, what that can look like. I felt like there was some hard challenge at the end, but really undergirded by this sense of God's deep, incredible love for us. Real quick, any of you end with or touch on at the end the idea of Jesus' words to the scribe, "You're not far from the kingdom"? Anyone want to share anything about that thought?
Yeah, Nick did. And he used it as a call to salvation. And it was a bold, it was beautiful. It was just, you might be close, but you're not in. Let's make sure
Mm.
you're in. And it was a beautiful call to salvation at the church. And so, um, yeah, that's how he ended it.
Yeah, I also ended there, and the quote that I used from a commentary was, "We should remember that someone close to being a Christian is just as far as the person who never commits to following Jesus." When I said that, we had a person in the front row go, "Oh man!" And he's normally our vocal, like, um, he's just great to preach to. Um, and it was a good moment for us to just really, again, right before communion, and we had a salvation moment as well right after that, statement and statement by Jesus, and also the commentary. So it really was kind of I said we should just pause, and some of us were here, we're at church, we're close, but that doesn't mean that we're in.
Right.
It was good connection.
Good. Saturday night, I saw this quote on Instagram. It was not attributed to anybody, so I don't know who it's from, but it says a lot of people think that Christianity is you doing all the righteous things you hate and avoiding all the wicked things you love in order to go to heaven. That's not Christianity. That's a lost man with religion. A
Mm.
Christian is a person whose heart has been changed. They have new affections. And I think it was helpful for me at the end of my message to say, hey, this shows us someone who is not far from the kingdom is trying really hard to not do all the things they want to do and trying really hard to do all the things they know they should do, but their heart's not been changed by the love of God. And similar to what you guys are probably saying, you can be around it, you can have knowledge, you can show up every Sunday, but you're the best description of you might be you're not far from the kingdom, because at the end of the day, you're still relying upon yourself, your work, not Christ's work. And um, I think it's a good helpful landing point probably. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I have an observation, Dave, that you got some feedback on a message about working for God out of and from, his justification and his love for us. And it just strikes me that no matter how, I'm sure you preach that version of the gospel regularly, and it's still stunning that there's feedback from people who were there all the time hearing that same repeated message. And it probably answers the question, why does Paul get to this topic so often in every letter to the church? It's because our hearts continue to need that type of reminder as we earn our way, strive our way, and work our way into religious justification. Just an observation.
Yeah. It's a whole Luther quote, the default mode of the human heart is self-justification. We just find ourselves going back there, right? Well, thanks guys thanks Nick and Yon for jumping in and giving Danny and Dan a little bit of a breather. And it's fun having you guys a part of this process. We're headed into Mark 13, good old rapture passage, end times passage or eschatology passage. It's going to be an exciting week. And I think Danny and Dan and Keith, you all preaching this Sunday?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening.